and welcome to the Unknown Webcast. This is just a bit of a trigger warning for those who believe words are more injurious than sticks and stones. I really am so conservative, I can't turn left even when I'm driving. In addition to giving trigger warnings to our viewers, Ron Hensel and I both drink coffee for your protection. This week, one time spiritual traveler Will Spencer joins us to talk as he reminds the church leadership that there is no quarter for false teaching. My name is Don Vino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. Unfortunately, our senior researcher, Ron Hensel, will not be with us today, and so we won't get his intelligence or sense of humor, unfortunately for me. uh, Welcome, Spencer. Will, how are you today?
Doing well, Don. Thanks for having me on.
Well, and now that you have been here, once we're done, you will know you have been had.
Okay.
So what I'm missing is Ron has this whole thing where he does an applause thing and all kinds. So we got to go without it. We just got to go, yeah. Fake applause, right? Yeah, it's a fake
Exactly.
applause. So Will Spencer, we met because of an article that someone sent me that you had done in the Christian Post,
hmm
which I can show folks here if I can remember how to do all this kind of stuff. Present, share screen. Oh yeah, I got it, and there it is. New Age movement is infiltrating your church. Now, as you talk about this, introduce yourself, you kind of talk about your spiritual travels prior to becoming a Christian. It's a really important article, by the way.
Thank
Um,
you.
why? Let's go backwards. Tell us a little bit about your spiritual meanderings through the world.
hmm So I was born in a Jewish family, liberal atheists, and but I always had a longing to know God. So even all the way back in when I was bar mitzvahed at age 13, I was given the Torah portion of the Ten Commandments, which is a pretty providential passage to read. And I remember being very interested in the rabbi's teachings as I was preparing for that. And then I ended up going to college in the San Francisco Bay Area. But for all my Jewish upbringing, there was not really a whole lot of conversation about the character or nature of God. We did these things because that's what Jews do. And so that's what we did. But then when I went to college in the Bay Area, this was in the late 90s, there was a massive explosion of spirituality happening around then, sort of a second flowering of the 1960s. And I just dove into that. So, Buddhism and, Ram Dass, Be Here Now, and Thich Nhat Hanh, and all of that. And I was genuinely fascinated by it because we were having these conversations about the ultimate nature of reality. And I always found that to be just really intriguing for some reason that just seems to be part of who I am. So over the next 20 or so years, I just went on a big spiritual exploration. Growing up in a Jewish family, I was pointed 180 degrees in the opposite direction of Christianity. And of course, going to college in Northern California, there's not a whole ton of Christianity up there. At least it doesn't make itself as obvious as other places in the United States. So over 20 or so years, I explored, let's say, Jungian psychology. I explored ayahuasca, which of course we can talk about, various forms of meditation, all kinds of spiritual teachings, until that took me on a long journey around the world between 2016 and 2020, where I went to go see these spiritual traditions and religious cultures for myself. And because I wanted to go and see and do and be like, okay, if I'm very serious about this wanting to understand God, which I was, let's go to the places that I've only read about and see what's actually going on there. And so that was the 20-year journey. And I suppose we can talk about what happened after that.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. So you actually went around the world to do that.
Mm-hmm.
As our supporters and many of our listeners know, we do the same thing, but we do it all in the United States.
Right. Well, the
Right?
world comes into the United States. The spiritual teachings of the East are just a huge part of American culture right now, which is why I wrote that article.
Yeah. A huge part of American culture. Um, it's interesting. We just did an article a couple of weeks ago talking about this because you have this group called the Nuns, calling themselves the Nuns.
Yeah.
Not like the Roman Catholic nuns with the NONES. Nuns were nothing, but they're spiritual. And something that we've been saying for over 30 years now is the time we live in today is more like the first century than any time in between,
Probably correct.
right? So what we have is uh, religious eclecticism with the core idea that there really is no absolute truth. There's your truth, my truth. So, the way my friend Bill Hunsberger puts it is in the first century, the average person believed all truth claims were equally true. Philosophers believed all truth claims were equally false. And politicians believed all truth claims were equally useful.
That's good.
Pretty much where we're at today. Not a
Hmm.
lot of changes. Uh, uh, for 1700 years or so, we have had Western culture, which is pretty much informed by the Christian worldview. That has been diminishing for the last 200 years or so, little by
Hmm.
little. By the year 2020, we really kind of hit the skids. There really is not a lot of Christian morality and ethos in culture. And
Hmm.
so it's a grab bag of religions like it was in the first century, which you
Yeah,
can give witness to.
I can. I would like to offer a modification to it. So I think that it's not exactly it's not quite like the first century because back then it was actually a grab bag of different religious traditions where you could participate in all these different systems. I don't think, at least modern Americans, I don't think they actually participate in different religious systems in the same way that people did 2000 years ago. Like
True.
for example, you'll meet a lot of people who will say that they're Buddhist. And when you ask them like, "Well, are you do you believe in the Dharma? Are you part of a sangha?" And they're like, "What's that?" It's like, "Okay, so that's like basically that's basic Buddhism, so you're not actually a Buddhist." I think that the modern American religion is entirely self-focused,
Hmm.
and psychologically driven.
Hmm.
So it's not so, but all these other religious systems, they're streams feeding into that alternate religion. And I think this is documented in a couple of great books that I can recommend. The Other Worldview by Dr. Peter Jones, excellent book. And then Carl Trueman's The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, which is excellent. And that was the religion that I was in. So I didn't actually, during my travels or during my own development, it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to try and be part of this religion or part of this religion. It wasn't so much that. It was I had my own religion of my own personal spiritual experiential development, and all these other traditions were woven into that. And that, I think, is what people are actually participating in, that sets itself up in opposition to Christianity.
Well, to biblical Christianity. I want to be clear
Yes.
on that part,
Yeah.
right? To
Yep.
biblical Christianity. In fact, our theme today is no quarter for false teaching.
Love it.
Now, as you know, we go to Paganicon where we hang out with 1,000 Wiccans, Buddhists, Hindus, uh, not so much Hindus, Buddhists, Wiccans, witches, Satanists, Druids. It's a fascinating place to talk to them. Many of them are refugees of the church,
Mm,
in some sense or another. They may not have been Christians at all. They may not have been in an actual Christian church, but a
right.
Christian, religiously Christian looking church. And they were looking for something more personally meaningful. There you go, what you're talking about.
Yep.
And for a very long time in the Wiccan community, Carl and I have talked about this a lot, and my friend Bill Hansberger. Um, if you asked a Wiccan to tell you what Wicca is, they would start out with, "For me, Wicca is."
Yep.
And then they'll explain it because there is no universal Wiccan idea. That's important.
Hmm.
They're making up as they go. There was also claims that they are trying to reconnect with Wicca from hundreds of years ago. Now, about 3 years ago, they changed that story to say, we don't really know what Wicca was 200 years ago.
Right.
They had their lore. What we're doing is creating our own lore, our own story. It was honest, at least, but they're saying
Mm,
we don't really know what it was.
right.
So it's new. whatever we do is good because it's new for us.
Yes, that's correct. And people feel that that a newer system provides no actual grounding. So there was a book in the early 90s that came out, very, very famous and popular in underground New Age circles, particularly in psychedelic circles. And it's Terence McKenna's Archaic Revival. And so this was a formative book. I believe Joe Rogan has mentioned it on his podcast many times. It sort of was one of the key texts that helped popularize psychedelics. So it documents some of Terence McKenna. Terence McKenna is a so-called ethnobotanist. So his interest was in finding the way that plants and psychedelic plant medicines had influenced native cultures around the world. So he became very famous as the guy who would take mushrooms and all these different drugs. And he had kind of a trippy sort of voice. He was like crazy uncle scientist, druggy guy. That was his shtick. So, but what he was trying to do in that book was say that, okay, so we have this spiritual awakening that's happening in the second half of the 20th century. It might seem very new to everyone who's going through it, the hippies and particularly the people in the 1990s, as that second wave of the tending towards the millennium, as that wave started to crest. He was trying to say, as new as this may seem, it's actually going back to a pre-Christian ancient future. So we are part of a long lineage, a tradition that Christianity came and interrupted. And so we're going back to that time to give people that sense of rootedness and groundedness, that it's in something deeper than their own ephemeral pleasures. And so that's what people are looking for. They recognize that if you get into Jungianism, or if you get into Wicca, or if you get into all these different things, that it's like, well, is this just a 20th century thing? Is this no deeper than my own in the moment desire? They want to connect to something so much deeper, but they refuse Christianity for all the reasons, biblical Christianity, for all the reasons that the Bible is clear that they will.
Right, exactly. The Federalists, I was talking about this article I read a couple of weeks ago, and we used part of it. One of their arguments, and one of the things that we've been saying, which we're talking about today, is that as things stand now, we have reached the age of re-enchantment.
Yeah, Carl Teichert talks about that.
Carl Teichert, right. So does this Federalist author. And
Mm-hmm.
we went, okay, they must be reading our material because we don't really know many others that are talking about the age of re-enchantment. But that's where we're at.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very much so. We went through a phase of the Enlightenment, which culminated in the new atheists in many ways that tried to secularize and despiritualize the public square. And what that did is that left a giant longing in the hearts, a God-shaped hole in the hearts of many Americans and many in the West. And that hole cries out to be filled. And if you've successfully ghettoized biblical Christianity, if you've made it low status, if you've made it shameful, et cetera, which has been going on for many years, and I think all the cultural apparatus has been successful in that God-shaped hole remains. So where are people going to go? And so when you have the New Age, which is hyper commercialized and has built giant media apparatuses and giant networks of money and influence into places like Esalen, which itself feeds into so many different news outlets,
Yeah.
you find that, like, in culture, particularly through massive outlets like Oprah and Eckhart Tolle and even Brene Brown to some sense, it's like, oh, here's what you're looking for. It's going to be administered by our new priesthood of psychotherapists and stuff like that. And so you get that's the end result, is trying to plug these misshapen false teachings into the God-shaped hole of many Americans.
Sure. Now you mentioned Esalen, and of
Mm.
course, through Esalen came the Enneagram into the evangelical church.
Wow.
Right. So you have
Yeah.
um, it'll come back to me. I have these senior moments periodically, so you
I
have to.
think we all have them all the time.
Claudio Naranjo. Claudio
Oh,
Naranjo picked up the
there.
Enneagram, went to Esalen. He was teaching the Esalen or teaching the Enneagram at Esalen. It was picked up by a couple of Roman Catholics who then took it back and taught it to others, and then eventually made its way into the Christian church, let's say, not necessarily evangelical, through two authors that are disciples of Richard Rohr, Suzanne Stabile and Ian Cron. Also infected were Brian McLaren by Richard Rohr. Also, it's infected Willow Creek Community Church by Richard Rohr. He is a main character in a lot of what's going on in the church today, which kind of we're going to touch on that because how is it that you then left what you were doing, this spiritual journey,
Hmm.
and journeyed to the place where you became a Christian?
Yeah. So I was I was a genuine seeker. I really wanted to understand. So a lot of people show up in the New Age for a variety of different reasons. People, what I say is that people are usually looking for purpose, meaning, and belonging. And so if you arrive into the New Age looking for one of those things, that is something that the New Age or many different communities will provide. I was not looking for those things. I was looking for truth. I genuinely wanted to know. Like I really want to understand God. I think that was a gift that he gave me, as a man. I don't think I can take any credit for it. It's just a longing, a longing to know and understand that I had since I was a child. And so as I was journeying through the New Age over the course of 20 years, I would encounter these different, theological, psychological frameworks, systems, systematic theologies. And I was always taking them apart, trying to understand, okay, what's going on here? How does this piece fit with this? How does the New Age work? How do these different systems overlap? And so I always wanted to understand because I was looking for a way to orient myself as a man where I could connect my thoughts, my words, and my actions to some higher purpose. So I could be a man of vertical integrity, let's say, not just horizontal integrity with my fellow men, but vertical integrity with God. And to do that, I had to understand who or what God is. So as I was navigating through the New Age, I discovered the phenomenon of child sex trafficking. Jeffrey Epstein, everyone knows his name nowadays, and situations like that. And I took a look at that. One of the things that the New Age says is that all is one and all is God. So pantheism is all is God and monism is all is one. And so I looked at this thing that was absolutely, objectively, morally reprehensible, evil, frankly, because there's no one who's participating in that actively, for whom it's an accident. Like, oh, I didn't know this was wrong, that I'm going to
Right.
buy this child human and sell it for, in order to be abused and sadly disposed of. Like it's just evil, and they know it's wrong, and they do it anyway. And I looked at that, and I was like, I can't get down with the idea that that's somehow God. I am trying to be a man of integrity, and I'm looking at the other people who are trying to be something very different, and yet both of us are equally God. That is what the New Age would teach. Furthermore, the New Age doesn't talk about moral law; it talks about karma. So
Right.
it's not that there's some higher moral law that we're accountable to. There's just the consequences of your actions, and if you do bad things, they'll ultimately come back on you. And that's how you get taught. That's how you get morally instructed over the course of many lifetimes. And so that teaching would say that a child who's being sex trafficked, that's their karma, that they had done something in a previous life that led them to be in that situation. That's the logical conclusion. And when I would try to get my fellow New Age people to acknowledge that, like, okay, would you seriously look a sex trafficked child in the eyes and say, sorry, kid, it's just your karma? Of course you wouldn't. Of course you would. No one would. Like it was a horrifying thought. But when I brought these things up, people would get very uncomfortable. Like I found the thing that broke the system,
Right.
right? And so I didn't quite know what to do with that. So this is at the conclusion of my travels, basically. So in February of 2020, I came back to the United States from overseas, and COVID was starting to happen. And so here I was watching evil begin to spread across the globe at an institutional level, kind of all at once. And it was at that time that some friends that I had made who live up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, gave me the book Simply Christian by N.T. Wright. And I talk about this in the Christian Post article.
Right.
And it was in that book, there was a particular passage in the article that I quoted that talked about Christ up on the cross driving back the wave of evil forever. And it was something clicked in that moment, and that began my journey to Christianity.
Yeah. 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 And an interesting journey it becomes.
Mm, it does.
So, I mean, the interesting thing about evil that you're talking about is something that I have used, like at the Parliament of World's Religions.
Mm,
Uh, as I was talking with a female that was behind the booth, it was a Buddhist group, and I started talking about evil as in this way, same way you're thinking about it. And we began talking about rape. And she said, "Oh,
Exactly.
right, rape is wrong." And I said, "Oh, okay. So just help me understand, because I'm really not that familiar with what you're saying. But if reincarnation is true, and you have to work off bad karma from a previous life, wouldn't it be the case that if a woman is raped in this life, it's because of bad karma in a past life that now has to be rectified?" She goes,
Bingo.
"Yes, she deserved it." I said, "Okay, that's fair.
Well,
Then
I
let me."
respect her saying it.
Well, I mean, because she's stuck.
Yeah,
And so I said, "Okay, so help me. I have one more question then. If she deserved it and she had to be raped to work off bad karma, then isn't it the case that the rapist was doing her a good deed by helping her to work off her bad karma from a previous life?" At which point she just turned and walked away.
correct. They have to.
I mean, you're stuck.
Yeah,
So
that's
here's
right.
here's one of the questions that's coming in, and I'm not sure how you're going to answer it. I know how I will answer it afterwards, and that is NT Wright good? I think I was told he was bad.
Um, uh, so all I can say, I've had very limited exposure to his wider body of work. So in Simply Christian, there were particularly the second two-thirds of the book was full of, just at the time, very what I found to be very moving portrayals of the Christian faith. It was the first work of apologetics that I had ever read. In fact, I didn't even know what apologetics was at the time. But I do remember the first third of the book was full of environmental social justice themes, and so you may have why you may have heard that he was bad is he does seem to have absorbed some of the popular liberal progressive wokeness in particular areas. But I do believe, at least from what I experienced, I should go back and reread the book. This was now 5 years ago. But for what I experienced, it was moving, and it reached me. But me from 5 years ago versus me today, I might have a different take. But that was the book that I suppose I needed to read at the time. That wasn't the only book that I read. I went straight to Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, which was the only book about Christianity that I read. And some people will say C.S. Lewis is good, and some people will say C.S. Lewis is bad. So I think it falls to a question of our own Christian discernment. But I'm
Well,
less familiar
yeah,
with his work.
yeah. Uh, C.S. Lewis is kind of a mixed bag, more so than N.T. Wright is. Uh, but we have a couple of articles kind of dealing with this. One is N.T. Wright's Long Farewell,
Mm.
and another one is Wright Wrong? And I would suggest people look at that. The thing is about some of these celebrity Christians is at one time they were closer to biblical faith. And so as they write material, either it's long enough ago that they were closer to the essential faith, or they're bringing stuff up that they still sort of believe. And I have noticed that God uses the strangest things to reach someone with Christ,
Hmm.
right? And so if you hear the gospel, and God uses that to bring you to Him, even though Wright may be wrong on some other issues that are important issues, you still heard the gospel in spite of his wrongness.
Hmm.
So, as you
Absolutely.
can tell, I'm not a Wright fan. But I know that God can use broken vessels because He uses me. So,
Same. Same.
yeah. So it sounds like because something in there was used by God to call you to Him, that is a good thing.
Yeah, what specifically did it was here I had come to my own conclusion that evil was an independent thing. It wasn't just an equal manifestation of God. It had its own independent reality and existence to some extent, and it wasn't just, the left hand of God, let's say. Like that's the if you've ever seen the yin yang, the popular Chinese yin yang symbol, that's what that symbol means, is that both light and dark are equal parts, a part of a higher truth. They might not use the word God, but they're equal parts of the higher truth, and the good has a little bit of evil in it, and the evil has a little bit of good in it.
Right.
All is one. That's exactly what that symbol means. So I had come to the conclusion that that was false, that had to be false, because I found child sex trafficking and many other things that I had seen while I was traveling. I'd found them morally reprehensible, but I couldn't
Right.
find anyone who would talk to me about it. And
Right.
so it was in N.T. Wright's book that he addressed evil as a conscious, independent thing separate from God that had to be overcome. And so it
Right.
was that, and particularly overcome in a specific way by Christ's sacrifice on the cross. Here
Right.
was the good overcoming an independent evil. And so that specific point is what reached me, because I said, finally, someone is talking about this like an adult. Because in the New Age world, it's very childish. Like, oh, it's just an illusion. It's just your subjective consciousness. You have to meditate and make your subjective preferences go away, and that's actually what they teach. And so, this Buddhist woman that you were talking to, you forced her to confront that, because
Right.
what Buddhism would say is there is no higher moral law. There is no objective good and evil. And so they're just, two different manifestations of God. And so you pushed right on the spot, which very skillfully, which is to say, are you willing to actually go and say that this is wrong, particularly around the issue of rape? And which obviously it's a horrible thing, but that's why I think the New Age isn't actually its own religion. I don't think it actually believes any of this. I think it's just a spiritual version of feminism, which we can talk about.
Oh, that's interesting. So we have another question, and I can jump in first if you don't mind. How is
Sure.
she deserved it ethically different from the Christian perspective that we deserve to suffer because of the original sin of Adam? Now, my response is fairly simple. We are not punished for the original sin of Adam. We are. We have a sin nature as a result of being born from Adam, but we are judged for our personal sins and punished for those, or rescued from them.
Mhm.
So that we have a sin nature is not the same thing as saying we're being punished because of Adam's sin. We're not.
Right. That's not causative, right? It's not like,
Right.
so I think we have to talk about the notion of reincarnation and some of the ways that the New Age and Buddhism tries to conceive of it. So to understand how this karmic wave works is, there's you. This is my own interpretation of the things that people say. So there's you, your persona. Here's Will Spencer. This is a persona. This is a persona that's being worn over a deeper spiritual identity, often called a higher self. So my higher self theoretically has put on this persona, will wear this persona of Will Spencer over the course of his lifetime, however it will be. This persona is set up to learn certain lessons based on time and place of birth, and this is how it ties into astrology, but that's a separate conversation. So I will learn this set of lessons, and then in death, take off this persona, get reborn, put on a new one. So the actions of a previous life created this wave that propagates forward into the next one. So
Right.
if my previous persona was, I don't know, Bob Smith did certain things during his lifetime through the higher self. The higher self then experiences the consequences of those things in the next lifetime, if that makes sense. So to say that this woman deserved it means that some version of her higher self did something in a previous life that then propagated forward into her current life. So
Right.
she is the direct and the sole cause of what occurred to her. And that is not the Christian teaching at all. We are not the sole cause of everything that occurs to us, where it's not a solipsistic view.
Right. Exactly right. So, um, it is interesting because you're the kind of what you're talking about is sort of a westernized version even of Buddhism. Because in
Correct.
Buddhism, you can go backwards and be born into an animal form of some kind,
That's
or
right.
forward. So one of our questions, we did an article on this some years ago. We wondered, what if you had been formerly a frog? What sort of evil could a frog have committed to have then been punished for? How does that
Right.
work? Right? It
Correct.
doesn't really make sense. And back to Man on Fire, we are born in Adam's family and then transferred to the headship of Christ when we become a believer.
Mhm.
And he has paid for our sins, the sins of the world. That would include Adam, obviously. But we are not punished for Adam's sin. We just have Adam's sin nature as a result of being born from him. So
And,
Good.
the question that I think he's trying to answer, which is the question, is why do bad things happen to good people? Right? That's the theodicy. That's the problem of evil. Why do bad things happen to good people?
It is.
Yeah,
It is.
that's
And we're gonna do that when we come back because we actually do have uh this is slightly used, so there'll be someone Carl's laughing in the background, but it's our stop off for our pretend sponsor.
Sometimes, things are hard. We all can relate to this. Cynthia's life is in crisis. She doesn't know if she can believe she's a sinner. How will she break the news to her parole officer? Jacob is still in shock. His pastor laughed when he suggested he might be the reincarnation of Elvis. Will he ever find a church that supports his spiritual views? Charity is engaged to Brad, who is already married to Betsy. That won't be a problem in Brad's and Betsy's polygamous cult, but Charity wonders how will all this work out in the afterlife. All these people have one thing in common. They're all looking for a gospel that's been retouched by an angel. If your gospel bothers you, have it retouched with a new revelation every week.
what?
Consult local listings for details. Retouched by an angel.
And there we go.
I'm I what did I help? What has happened?
I'm sorry.
What was that?
That is our pretend commercial.
Oh,
We
got it.
we you know what? We love satire here. And some things just need to be made fun of, I think.
Yes. Oh yeah.
And and that's one of them. So we have many of the cults, for example, have new revelation from an angel. Think about it. Joseph Smith in the
Oh.
Mormon Church, Islam, an angel appeared to him. So, and you have a lot of that going on in the various religious groups where they're getting information from somewhere outside of ourselves. There's a community. Urantia book is another one.
Mhm.
Uh, right where you got 100, I think 179,000 Jesuses across the cosmos.
Oh,
Uh,
that many.
yeah, that many, and so we have a Jesus for this planet, and the name of this planet is Urantia, therefore the Urantia book.
Oh.
And so so it's just kind of making fun of um teachings by other spirit beings that are permeating not just culture but the church.
Mhm.
Uh, New Age pick. Oh, why do you have a New Age pick on the thumbnail? I guess. Oh, I know why. Because we're talking about New Age.
Oh, of the
The
thumbnail of the
thumbnail,
YouTube video. Okay.
the thumbnail for the YouTube video. That's correct. So that's the story there. Unfortunately, it wasn't live, but it was still had the same effect, and I had you confused even.
Yes.
So I also want to show for folks that they can go here. Your website is willspencer.co.
Mhm.
And if anybody wants to go there and look at it, it is here. Wandering around in the woods, there's nice some trees there, and so they can contact you. Can they contact you through there as well?
Yes,
Yes.
you can.
Yes,
Yes.
they can. Okay, good. Uh bah. Okay, so that one's gone. Stop sharing. Um Now before I so rudely interrupted us, where were we going with this?
We were talking about reincarnation and
Yes,
yes.
reincarnation. Yeah, yeah. Um that is a problem because what do you do then with the problem of evil?
Right.
And what about other spirit beings? Now we talked about because we're talking about New Age, which is a westernized version of a lot of Eastern beliefs. And you're right; they're really not pure Buddhist, Hinduism, or anything like that. It is adaptations that Westerners have made to feel more like Western society, uh, and yet rejecting Judeo-Christian beliefs.
Mhm.
Now, you mentioned that you have seen this. Oh, a problem of evil. That's what is coming up. The problem of seeing evil as a conscious thing. Here we go. Let's do this. The problem of seeing evil as a conscious thing is that it would mean that God created evil since he created all things. For me, it makes sense for evil. Okay. So
I feel like there might be a second half to that statement.
there actually is, yes. Uh, to be an orientation towards death not existing. I'm not sure what that means. Oh yeah, an orientation toward death, but not cessation of life.
Hmm.
So again, here's my response. You use the word thing. Evil is a thing. I would suggest evil is not a thing, but it's the absence of something.
Hmm.
Evil is the absence of good. And so we reject good and then do evil things as a result of rejecting good. We suffer because the world is currently cursed due to the fall, and so evil things happen. But it is again the absence of good, which is the absence of the rejection of God, and the absence of that is what causes all of the evil things that happen in the world.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Sure. I think the world, the flesh, and the devil, right? So there is a fallen world that has been corrupted since sin entered the world, sin and death that's woven into our own flesh. And I think that there is a conscious aspect where you have the supernatural. You see this
Sure,
all throughout the
sure.
New Testament. And but those three work together. They're not mutually exclusive. But there is a supernatural component to evil that seeks to draw us away from God, that seeks to draw us away from the good, that seeks to draw us away from his moral law.
Right. And that's the key, is drawing you away from the good. So we have fallen spirit beings called angels, fallen angels, we call them demons. They are absent good,
Hmm.
and they act as those who do not have good any longer,
Hmm.
to wreak havoc on the lives of humans who are kind of struggling through trying to figure out what's God expect of me,
Hmm. Well,
right?
he tells us in his word
He
exactly what he,
does. He definitely does.
yeah, yeah.
So, man on fire. Thank you for the questions. I think, and hopefully that was a reasonable answer at least.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
I deal with this all the time. So I'm active on X at Ren of Men, it's like Renaissance of Men, but shorter Ren of Men. That's what my podcast was originally called. And so from time to time, there's a woman. Perhaps she lives in India. Pretty sure it's a woman who is a devoted Vedantist. I'm glad I was able to get that. So Advaita Vedanta is a cultic teaching of Hinduism, very popular in the New Age, and it says Advaita Vedanta, sort of non-dualism, all is one. And she's a very committed Vedantist. And when I write about New Age stuff, she comes sailing in, and we will have a lengthy exchange about just how broken her worldview is, and she'll change the subject, and eventually I'll wear her down. But she asks the same questions, like, well, okay, well then, where did evil come from? Right?
right,
Did God make Satan? And I think Scripture is very clear that iniquity was found in Satan, and he rebelled against God. Where did
right,
that come from? These are things that I don't know that we are capable of answering. There are many aspects of reality that Scripture is very clear that we just cannot understand. How is Jesus fully God and fully man? We cannot understand that. How can we as humans understand eternity as time-bound beings? There are some things that we just can't understand because they exist on a plane of reality we're not capable of comprehending. So to try and explain away
right.
evil as like, well, it's just an orientation towards death. Are there not circumstances where death can be a good thing? The Christian would view death in many cases as a blessing, because it's the gateway to eternal life. Does that mean we pursue death? No, but I
No,
don't think we look at death as a curse.
right. Well, so one of the things you're talking about is something that we talk about pretty frequently among ourselves. We call it the mechanics of the faith. There's a lot of things that we know, but we can't fully explain. We don't know how it
Correct.
works, right? The Trinity is one that I think we can get closer to than we sometimes recognize. The problem isn't that God doesn't tell us that he exists as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. He doesn't tell us the mechanics of how it works,
Correct.
right? And it just asserts there's one true God. That's pretty clear. And then without any apology or explanation, he asserts the Father is God, the Son is God, the Holy Spirit is God. And so we then describe that as the Trinity. And one of the things I have used, I don't know if you were ever a Star Trek fan. I was a
Hmm.
Star Trek fan.
Yeah.
Love Star Trek. And I get some good theological stuff out of Star Trek, actually.
Huh.
And there was one when Deanna Troy was in one of their little space modules and crash landed on a planet. And on this planet, there was a being unlike any other being that she'd ever experienced. Now, the thing about Star Trek is you suspend your understanding of our world to go, that life form might exist someplace else. It's a different
Hmm.
life form than me. Now, that life form had no depth. It looked like it was an oil slick. It had no life signs. You couldn't tell if it was living or not. And yet, it could communicate. It could move and cover her spacecraft and cause any signals to not be able to penetrate through it. It could rise up into a form of a man or just be an oil slick. It had no depth, but it could swallow a person
Oh,
whole.
I remember that one.
Okay. And the cool thing is, you go, well, that could be, it's a different life form. So here's the problem: God is a different life form.
Hmm.
He doesn't conform to our life formness and therefore exists differently than we do. We have one God that shares the same nature with Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Not three
Hmm.
gods, not three parts of God, one being called God that is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Can I explain it farther than that? No. Why? Because God is not like me and I can't understand that.
That's right. I would go one step further and even say humans are the only life form that we can understand. We can't understand what it is to be a bird. We don't
Yeah,
understand bird. We don't
exactly.
understand
Right.
birdness or dogness or sharkness, right?
Right.
And so we can't understand. We barely understand what it means to be human. In fact, special revelation probably tells us the things that we need to know more than our own experience is reliable. So I think that there's this Western notion, particularly since the Enlightenment, that we can and must and are able to understand all things, and are something about us rebels against this notion that no, there are some things that we simply cannot understand. No, but I'm the guy. I'm supposed to be able to know everything. No, you're actually not, and it's okay. It's really okay. Just follow the things in this book, which you can understand. Whether you want to or not is another matter, and be at peace with that. And that's very difficult. It's very difficult for Americans today.
It is. It totally is. I was at a New Age fair, and an angel channeler was there. Now, I have a very good friend who used to be an angel channeler, D Virtue. I love D Virtue. But I
Oh,
was
Doreen Virtue.
pardon?
You said Doreen Virtue?
Doreen Virtue, yeah. We're very
Wonderful.
good friends. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Uh, but it wasn't her. It was a different, very popular New Age angel channeler. And so as I got to talking about her, and she's explaining what she does, and I asked her, "How do you know if it's a good angel?" And she stopped and she looked. She goes, "Well, they're all good angels." And I said, "Oh, okay. How do you know that?" "Well, because everything is good." I said, "Oh, so
Oh.
sounds sort of Hinduistic to me. Everything is good because everything is God. Is that kind of where you're going?" She goes, "Yes." I said, "Okay, so let me just go further because I'm kind of not smart and I need understanding. So, are you saying that everything is God? The rocks are God, the trees are God, the table is God, you're God, I'm God, and what my cat left in the litter box this morning is God?" I said, "Wouldn't that mean that we're not really elevating ourselves to godhood, but we're all exactly equal to the lowest common denominator? In this case, what my cat left in the litter box." And she said, "You're making fun of me." I go, "Well, no, it's even worse than that. Because if what you're saying is true, all is oneism, then there's really no you or me. There's only you, and you're making fun of yourself."
What did she say? She throw something at you?
Pardon?
Did she throw something at you?
She did not. She was not happy, but
Yeah.
she said, "I have to go do my speech now." And I said, "Okay, I understand. That's fine."
Yeah.
Uh, but what was important about the discussion was I would have liked to have reached her. That would have been great. But in fact, we did an article on this a couple of weeks ago. I have a philosophy that very often in those discussions, I'm not as concerned about talking to that person. I'm talking to the lurkers, everyone who's standing around listening,
Yeah.
because they don't have to defend a position. They have the opportunity to listen to the positions, weigh them out, and make a decision.
Hmm. Yeah. It's, I want to be careful how I talk about this because, um, I want to show grace. So what I discovered in that world is a lot of people have not seriously considered the trajectory of the ideas that they
Right,
profess.
right,
Right. And so they don't think through the moral implications. They don't think through the sacred and profane implications. They don't think through any of that. It's something that they've adopted to find purpose, meaning, and belonging. And when you take those, which are all they're all meaningful in their own way, but they're very emotionally driven. And when you take the sharp reality of facts and consequences and conclusions, and you push on that emotional motivation, what comes out is the nakedness that they haven't considered these ideas. And so that can be very uncomfortable. And when you push hard enough, if you do it in a gentle way, what comes up is it really is just a rejection of the God of the Bible. It's seeking to have some of the things that God offers, but on terms that are not His. And it's
right.
it's it's very it's very sad. And I certainly, I mean, I encountered that in my own way during my time on the road, not really knowing what it was. And so it's a mission field. It's an evangelistic
It
mission
is.
field, but it's one of the most difficult ones because it's not like you're going to the Mormons or the Jehovah's Witnesses where everyone believes roughly the same thing. That's not the case in the New Age. Everyone has constructed their own self-fulfilling
Right,
religion based on their own independent needs and story. And so there are a few key themes that need to be unwound. But when people ask me, well, how do I evangelize to New Age people? It's like, well, you need to paint me a picture of the person you're talking to, because someone who is an angel channeler will have a
right,
very different set of apologetics than somebody who's super into yoga or
right,
someone who's into Buddhist meditation.
right,
But
right,
but there are people that are genuinely searching and seeking, but the evangelical church has abandoned that community, um, or they've adopted many of their own beliefs, frankly. But I think there are people that are looking, but without Christ to be found in many places, He's not going to be found there.
Well, that's exactly right. Now, um, you're right. You have to paint a picture of the person, but something that just for me, this is kind of how I operate. I usually start with a question like, why do you believe what you believe? Or what is it that you believe?
Right.
And if I listen, they are going to tell me everything I really need to know to ask the next question. And it's a
Yes.
process. But it means I have to listen.
Hmm.
One of the hazards of many apologists is they approach this as though they have all the answers. You don't,
Hmm.
because you don't know what they believe. So you could be starting in the exact wrong place if
That's
you
right.
don't ask them the basic questions. So, which is going to have us turn a corner here just briefly.
Hmm.
Coming from all of that background, you were Jewish, you ended up checking all of the Eastern religions and other groups. Eventually, you came to the faith, which I'm thrilled about. And then you did this weird thing. You started going to a church or churches. What
Hmm.
did you find there?
Well, I got really, I guess, blessed in some sense because I got baptized in September of 2020. By the way, a big part of the story that I've left out was that I remember I mentioned my friends in Coeur d'Alene who gave me the book Simply Christian by N.T. Wright. I had met them 5 years previously at the Burning Man Festival. They were Christians who had been running an underground ministry there. So they
Okay,
were the first to introduce me to Christ in 2015. I then traveled, went and found my, I don't want to say I found my answers. I found that there were no answers. And as soon as I got back to the United States, they were the ones that handed me the book and started giving me the real answers. So they get to watch a whole 5-year process for me. But anyway, so they baptized me in the Spokane River in September 2020, Labor Day weekend, actually. And but one of the things that was odd about 2020 was that all the churches were shut down. there was and I had no idea how to go about finding a church. I'm like, do I just Google one and go to the nearest one? I did start doing a few things. I was like, well, this is New Age 20. This is formerly New Age 2020, 2021 me. I'm like, well, Christians forgive people. This is what I'm saying to myself. Christians forgive people. They say the Lord's Prayer and they pray on their knees by their bed, and they go to church and they pray on their knees before bed every night. And those are the things that Christians do. So I better start doing those things. So, all right. That was just my own little baby naive. I mean, it's true, but it's as I think it's my own thought process is cute as I go back through it. But the churches were closed. And so I was looking around for a church. I soon discovered very quickly that churches had many of them had statements of faith on their website. And I had become a political conservative from traveling overseas, which is another conversation. So through reading churches' statements of faith, I could see which ones were more aligned with what I understood to be sort of a Christian perspective on the world. And I found one. They were shut down due to COVID, and they opened for a brief time, and they had masks. I'm like, I'm not wearing a mask. That's a whole separate conversation, I suppose. But I didn't feel like it was really, I don't know. I went to that church once and I was like, there's something not right about this room. So I was without a church for about a year after becoming a Christian. And it wasn't until I spoke at a men's conference in October of 2021, where Pastor Michael Foster, who wrote the excellent book, It's Good to Be a Man, pointed me to Apologia. So Apologia is Pastor Jeff Durbin and Pastor James White here in Phoenix. And so I started attending that church in would have been October, November of 2021. I took the membership class in February of 2022, and that's when I got introduced to the doctrines of grace. And I remember sitting in the membership class, and they were working through Tulip, and I got to limited atonement, and I was like, I don't know how I feel about that. But I didn't just assume that. I didn't just assume that because I didn't like it that it wasn't true. I was like, okay, these guys have a church. They know what they're doing. They must have a perspective that I don't understand. So I did what anyone would do, and I went to YouTube and I tried to understand it, and then it clicked. And so I was able to, and so I became a member of Apologia. And so, which I discovered later that Tulip and Reformed theology were the same thing. It's like, what is this Reformed theology? I hear people, oh, it's this, right? So lots of listening on YouTube, attending church, stuff like that. And so I got to skip a lot of modern evangelicalism. I just went straight to a more Calvinistic view, and over time, I got more convicted. So Apologia is a member of the Southern Baptist Convention. I got more convicted of sort of Presbyterian leanings once I started looking into the question of infant baptism, which I know is a controversial question in many circles. But I came to see the goodness and the rightness of that, and so I eventually left membership at Apologia and became a member of Reformation Presbyterian Church, which is in Apache Junction. And so that's been sort of my journey. And so your question, you asked, what did I see in the church? I saw a lot of things. One of the things that I've observed, of course, is a lot of New Age influence in subtle and not so subtle ways. So it's not always as overt as yoga or the Enneagram or stuff like that. A lot of the way that it feeds in is through an emphasis on personal experience, that worship is about what I get from worship instead of what I give. I've seen a lot of that. Of course, there's a lot of feminist thinking of various degrees of severity in many churches. And I think that there's a lot of wanting to soften doctrine, of not the places that I've been. Of course, there's a lot of wanting to soften the doctrine to make something more appealing to the world. And I just had Pastor Matthew Everhart on my podcast last week. He wrote a book called Worshiptainment. It's a great little book, easy read, comparing modern evangelical big box, kind of laser light show worship to a more reformed liturgical tradition. And as I'm reading through this book, I'm like, man, like all of this is so worldly and so informed by New Age thinking. And so it just seems to me that, J. Gresham Machen wrote Christianity and Liberalism in the first half of the 20th century.
Great book.
Excellent book. But I would love for him to come back and write another one because, theological liberalism is one battle. I think that battle is over. And now we're facing a different kind of liberalism in the church that it has its claws sunk very deep into evangelicalism. and I see it. I'm very sensitive to things coming from the New Age world. In fact, there was a church that I was visiting where I caught a woman doing New Age practices and had a whole big church trial with her about it. And she was adamant that the thing that she was doing, there's nothing New Age about it. I produced hundreds of pages of evidence, like, no, this is very New Age, and I just laid it out, and her conscience has just bounced right off her conscience. And so I'm sensitive to these things, and I'm becoming aware that many pastors and many congregants simply aren't. And so I don't know what to do about it, but I hope to make my own contribution in ways.
Well, yeah, and one of the problems, in fact, my pastor and I talk about this very often. I am blessed. I'm in a very good church.
Same.
Yeah, not big, but perfect for us.
Same.
And he loves apologetics, fortunately for me, because there's 3 apologists in his church he's got to put up with. And he's concerned about, how do I protect my flock? And I said, okay, here's my recommendation. Biblically, you have to teach the flock, guard the flock, and disciple the flock. That's your job. Having said that, that doesn't tell you how to protect it completely, because when Paul spoke to the Ephesian elders in Acts 20, he said to guard the flock from infiltrators coming from the outside. He also said from those who rise up from within.
Mm-hmm.
My suggestion is, you have people that are going to listen to Christian radio, Christian television, read books from, quote, Christian sources that are not Christian, and they're bringing that bad theology and heresy with them into the church without you realizing it.
Yes.
You can't guard against that easily. So you stay doing what you're doing, and you stay faithful to talking to people as they bring stuff in. I think that's all you can do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's important. Man on Fire has another question here, and that is, do you think there's an overlap between what New Age folks say about God in everything, and Colossians 1:15? It could be they're right on track, but are missing something.
Mm-hmm. Is that is Colossians 1:15, all things hold together in him? Is that one?
Let's look it up real quick,
Let's
so we
look.
don't tell stories about it. How about that?
1:15.
Okay.
Yeah, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. Is that Man on Fire? Is
Yep.
that the verse that you mean?
Yeah, that would be the one. Yeah.
Is
I'm
there?
not, and I don't see that there's an overlap.
No, me neither.
There, he's the image of God, the firstborn of all creation. 15 through 18. Let's look that up. Let's look that up in real time here. Colossians 1.
Yeah, put it up on screen.
Pardon?
Put it up on the screen.
Okay, we'll do that. Colossians 1. Go. Okay. Now I want to bring it over onto the screen. What is that doing? There we go. 1:15. Okay, the image of God. Now, this takes me a minute sometimes. I was a little surprised at that. There we go.
Mm-hmm.
Entire.
I don't see an overlap between those two verses. I mean, maybe.
No, there is not. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. Now, that doesn't mean he was the first one that came into existence, but the preeminent one.
Right.
For by him all things were created. In other words, this goes back to what John wrote in the book of John. He created all things.
A 1:16 might have been.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a second. First John, the Gospel of John, is refuting 2 heresies: the Ebionites, that Jesus didn't have a pre-existence, and the Docetists, who denied his physicality. So he's kind of following up on that in the Colossians piece as well. For by him all things were created in heaven and in earth, visible and invisible, whether dominions, thrones, or rulers, or authorities. For by all things were created by him and through him, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together.
I was right.
Pardon?
I was right. I was like, oh, is that the all things hold together? Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
Yep. And he is the head of the body of the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead. So he's again the preeminent resurrection, the primary one. And in everything he might be, there's the word, preeminent. So
Mhm.
it's really all about who Christ is. I'm not sure how New Age would fit into that really.
Well,
Uh,
a New Age person would listen to that and they would say, "Oh, all is one and all is God." And here I have this verse: He is before all things, and in Him all things hold together. It's saying basically the same. It's saying basically the same thing, except it's not saying the same
except
thing
it's not saying the same thing, right?
because it's not making a literal observation, right? And so in the same way that like Christians are called to be salt and light, right? Preservatives, right? We bind together communities where the things hold together, but they don't physically hold together in me, right?
Right.
There's a consistency that's established of righteousness that binds things together and keeps them from falling apart. For example, in the pre-flood times, the way that every man, it was just pure chaos, right? There's no
Yeah.
righteous moral law. It's a bit like that.
Right. Right. So he's laying out who Christ is so that we understand who it is that we're dealing with with the Colossians. So, yes, a New Ager could take that, and this what they do is out of context and then try to make it make something else,
That's right.
which is not. If you follow the context, it's all about who Christ is,
Mm-hmm.
what he did, and that he is preeminent over everything.
Mm-hmm.
That's Paul's whole idea there. So, good question, man on fire. I'm glad you asked it. And now, as always is the case, we ran over time, which is okay.
Can I add one thing to that last?
Absolutely, you sure
So,
can.
so the context piece is really important, and this is something that New Agers really struggle with. Is they'll want to pull out one verse from the Bible and say that that supports their entire cause. Like, well, let's read a couple verses in one direction or another and say, is that true as well? Or let's pick a whole other book. In fact, I had a New Age guy text me, a former friend text me Romans 1:20, trying to say, like, you've always understood that. I'm like, oh, Romans chapter 1 is great. Like, read the verses right around that verse in Romans 1, and he didn't have anything to say. It's like, okay, so if you're going to be choosing particular verses out of the Bible, are you going to take these other ones with it? Well, no.
Right.
It's like, well, okay, then what's your standard to determine what verses you like and don't? You don't actually have a standard. So you can't harvest from this field.
Yeah, you cannot. And unfortunately, too few Christians really even understand that.
Right.
So as I deal with those who have come out of false groups, my starting point almost always is context is king, and I lay out what that is, and we follow it. And I have a good friend, Andre. His name is. He's blind. He reads more than any two-sighted people I know. He's amazing. As he grabbed a hold of this over a couple of months of working with him, he just fell in love with the understanding the Bible and context. And he called me up one day. And he said, he was asking about Matthew 7. And he said, I can't quite figure it out. I read the verses before and after. I said, okay, well, here's something you're missing. You're stuck thinking the context starts with the chapter beginnings and the verses. It doesn't. They weren't in the beginning.
Yeah.
The context of Matthew 7 starts in Matthew 5. So if you want to get the context of Matthew 7, you got to go back to 5 and work your way up to, because everything ties together in what Matthew is writing. And he went, oh, that makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Context makes a huge difference. So good. That's a good observation. We're going to have you back again when Ron is here.
Anytime. Glad
So
to.
if you can hang on when we close out here, I'd like to talk to you for just a moment. But to everyone else, thank you for joining us. And we will be back next week.